Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from. We've got another webinar today, PCI DSS Simplified, What You Need to Know. We have Jim Hansen, Senior Director of Product Management, and Tom Diakino, Senior Systems Engineer, here with us today. I'll go ahead and hand it over to Jim now.
Excellent. Thank you, Vincent. So welcome, everybody. We're going to talk with you today about some PCI DSS goodness. Now, the specific agenda that we're going to walk through here is going to walk through some common challenges, give you a sense of what you can think about as you're thinking about a pre-audit type scenario of just preparing for being PCI compliant. If you're an existing organization that's already PCI compliant, of course, you should be thinking about those things as well. We're going to talk about some of those core capabilities for PCI and what you need in order to be successful with your PCI audits. We'll talk about automation and consolidation. Tom then will give you a quick demo of our product and how that will help you in your PCI initiative. And then we'll just circle back and open it up for some questions. Now, just to start off with, again, let's set the stage. Everybody on the phone here has some relationship or influence as it relates to PCI DSS. And PCI DSS, of course, as we all know, has been in the news quite a bit lately. Now, when you look at some of the retail organizations as an example that have been impacted recently, one of the things that you got to think about, it's like, oh goodness, these guys, you know that they spend a lot of money and a lot of time, and they dedicate a lot of resources to being compliant and to manage good security. But the reality is that the threat landscape that we're dealing with today is changing, and it's very difficult to be able to put all of the right preventative solutions in place to go detect or prevent, rather, the issues that are happening. At the same time, you need to think about some of the detective type controls that you need in place. Now, these organizations obviously are just examples of retail companies that have been impacted, and the reason that I bring these guys up is because they all have one thing in common, and that is that they were impacted through point-of-sale type systems that got compromised. And, of course, we've seen that in the news as well. And, of course, outside of this, there is a huge long tail of other organizations that have also been impacted. And again, as we look at how these organizations were compromised and what the bad guys did to break into these companies, it's not surprising, right, that as the bad guys get better and better at doing their jobs, we have to get smarter about the approaches that we're taking to not only be compliant but also to be secure. Now, you guys also know, of course, that coming here in April 8th of this year, Microsoft has decided to end of support Windows XP. Well, that's going to have a big impact on a lot of people, both within the retail industry and outside the retail industry. If you think about all of the different systems that are out there that run Windows XP, you have 1.9 million or more point-of-sale systems that are actually running XP today. And of course, 95% of the American ATMs are running Windows XP. That's huge. And if you think about what it means from just a basic end-of-support perspective, it basically means that there's no more Patch Tuesday for Windows XP. There's no more opportunity to close those vulnerable systems as new vulnerabilities are identified. So we've got a big challenge on our hands, and as we think about this problem, and if you're not in the retail industry and you're thinking about it in the context of your business, right, if you guys are running XP, you got to think about how you migrate off of that, because, of course, as part of DSS or PCI DSS, you do have to run vulnerability scans, but if you don't have the ability to remediate those vulnerabilities, you're not necessarily going to be compliant with PCI, and that's going to be a problem. So anyway, there's all kinds of philosophical arguments that people are having about that, but let's just kind of go forward. If you think about the specific places where most people fail around PCI, it really boils down to about 6 different areas, right? And these are the individual requirements as defined by TrustWave in a report they did about 1.5 years ago. And nothing's really changed. People are still struggling in these same places. Now, just to give you kind of a slightly different view of this, right, we look at for example, requirement 11 and 10 and 12 and 1 and 2. And there's a high number of organizations that fail in these areas. Something simple like being able to regularly test your systems and processes, right? Most people look at compliance as kind of a necessary evil. You invest money, you invest time, you invest people to go deal with PCI, but keep in mind too that a lot of what PCI is looking for is just good security hygiene, right? And as we look at each of these requirements and where people start to fail, we start to see some common themes across the board, right? And again, looking at even something simple like requirement 10, where you have to track and monitor all access to network resources. Well, how do you do that effectively? How do you know, for example, what's in your environment? Well, as part of thinking about this problem, what you can do is start to ask yourself some really important questions that, if you're building a new PCI program internally, or even if you have an existing PCI program, think about this, right? Where do all your PCI relevant assets live? And I've worked with, oh goodness, hundreds of organizations that are all configured a little bit differently. Some organizations have specific network segments that are set up for their PCI assets, right? And they have that cardholder data environment contained in different ways, and other organizations don't necessarily. Not that one or the other is definitively a good thing or bad thing. It largely depends on your business, but you have to understand where those PCI assets live. You have to understand how they're configured, and you do have to know how they're segmented or not from the rest of the network, because that has an influence on what ultimately is in scope for PCI. Now, if you think about some of the requirements that were released as part of 3.0, there was a lot of clarification provided around what organizations need to do in order to adequately segment and how to determine, for example, what's actually in scope. Now, that part of this conversation is a little bit outside of scope for this discussion, but it's something that you definitely need to look at. But beyond where those assets are, you also need to understand who's accessing the various resources. Think of those basic W's, right? The when, the where, the what can they do, the why, and the how. And it's important because as you start to monitor the environment for access, as you're monitoring the environment for threats, you have to understand who's accessing it. You have to understand where they're accessing it from, how they're accessing it, and also what they're actually doing. Okay? And of course, from there, you also need to take that next step, which we were just talking about a couple minutes ago regarding the Windows XP end of life, or end of service, excuse me, which is what are the vulnerabilities that are in your PCI defined network, right? Are those vulnerabilities at the application level? Are they on the operating system? If you're running XP, boy, I tell you, it's going to be game day for the bad guys on April 8th, because they're going to be looking for systems to compromise, and they'll have a much better opportunity to do that, right? So how do you identify what those vulnerabilities are? And then secondly, how do you then respond to those vulnerabilities? How do you go remediate and make sure that the systems are patched, and then have confirmation of the fact that those vulnerabilities were removed in a way that makes sense? And then lastly, what constitutes your network baseline? What's normal? What's acceptable? What do your systems normally behave like versus being, and so that way you have an opportunity to be able to know when something bad has happened, because you can see that abnormal type activity. I would suggest to you guys, as you're thinking through these questions, sit down as a team. If you're a team of one, hey, sit down with yourself. If you're a team of multiple people, sit down and have the conversation. Answer these questions. How do you what do you never want to happen in your forward to be able to put the right controls in place to be able to solid security program in place as well. All right. So those are the questions. Now, we all know too that there's this universe of these organizations and a lot of companies don't always get along. Need to compliance, although very environments and that you're having the right conversations. Compliant, but again, think about it in the context of security, which the reality is if you're practicing good security and you're practicing good continuous security monitoring, you're going to be much more likely to meet PCI. And again, we'll talk about the details of that here in a minute. So what do you need for PCI DSS? Now, there's a whole bunch of capabilities or controls that PCI requires that you put into place, right? And as we talked about, one of the most important things is to understand what's out there. If you don't understand what's inside of your PCI environment, and even what's outside of that PCI environment, it's difficult to know how to be able to respond and run vulnerabilities and find out what's actually out there, right? So think about asset discovery. There's a lot of different mechanisms available to do that, and that's inclusive to doing some active network scanning, passive network scanning. You can do asset inventory, which is really understanding what's on the machine, what kind of services are actually installed, because the reality is if you're looking at the services and you start to see deltas between services on one of your PCI systems, that in and of itself could be a good indicator of compromise of some kind. So making sure that you're able to identify these types of things either passively or actively becomes really important. But once you understand what's there, you also need to have a good understanding of how those systems can actually be compromised. And we do that through vulnerability assessment, of course. And there's two different components to vulnerability assessment in PCI. You have to do your internal vulnerability assessments, and then you also have to do your external vulnerability assessments through an authorized ASV. Now, obviously, as part of the internal vulnerability scans, you want to be able to assess your assets, identify what vulnerabilities exist, and then, of course, from there, it gives you the opportunity to go respond and close those vulnerabilities by patching and or putting mitigation controls in place to be able to prevent threats from hitting those machines. But at the same time, once you do the vulnerability assessment, your job doesn't end there, right? You still need to go down that path of doing threat detection. And you do threat detection through tools like network IDS and host IDS. For those of you who have a wireless network, which is probably everybody, you have to do wireless IDS. You need to know what's happening within those networks so that you can monitor for those threats and the communication related to the malware or the compromises that are actually trying to communicate outbound in some kind of way. And there's lots of tricks that the bad guys use to do that. And of course, you can't forget file integrity monitoring, right? Another key requirement of PCI. But even going beyond that, we still want to take a look at it from more of a behavioral monitoring perspective. PCI requires that you collect your logs from all of your security devices and the assets that you have within the PCI cardholder environment, or really just the PCI environment in general. You want to be able to do net flow analysis so that you can understand what's happening, and you can look at that wire as the communication is taking place and find those threats based off of, again, some of the activity and the communication that's taking place between your assets and either other assets or things outside of that cardholder environment. And, of course, service availability monitoring. Are my machines there? Are they up and running? And if not, are there new services or things that have either come or have gone that you need to be aware of in order to make sure that the environment is being monitored appropriately? And then lastly, of course, you got to go do something with all of the information that you have there. So this brings in this notion of security intelligence. So there's a lot of products out there, SIEM products as an example, where you can take and correlate the event data that you're collecting from your devices, bring that data into the system, and start to look for different types of pattern-based threats as well. Now, at the same time, though, you also need to respond to incidents as they take place, right? So being able to take all of these key security essentials and bring them together, these are the functionalities ultimately that you need for PCI DSS. And this happens to be the set of functionality, not surprising because we're doing the webinar, that we provide as part of our unified security management product, being able to take all of these built-in capabilities of asset discovery, vulnerability assessment, network IDS, host-based IDS, file integrity monitoring, etc., and bring them into a single place where you can understand both the information and also the context by which that information is presented to you becomes extraordinarily valuable, right? And if you look at how most companies do this today, you go off and you buy 10 or 12 different solutions to handle all of these individual capabilities. And this is something that our customers have enjoyed, which is that ability to do everything all within a single built-in application. And of course, you'll notice in the middle of this slide here that I mentioned this notion of our ALIENVAULT Labs threat intelligence. The threat intelligence is a really important component. And the reason for that is, oops, didn't mean to hit that, sorry, is that the threat intelligence gives us the ongoing updated information about threats that are happening out within the world at large that your environment can understand, take advantage of, and help you respond more quickly to. Now, keep in mind that all of these things are just technologies, right? You know, we're not even talking about the process and procedure that also goes along with PCI DSS. That's a whole nother topic. Now, as I mentioned, we've got this thing called ALIENVAULT Labs Threat Intelligence, right? Think of this as a crowdsourced way of being able to identify threats, and then what we do is we take the information that we learn about those threats and we collate it all together and we deliver that into our unified security management solution in order to provide you with guidance on what's happening out there, right? So that as you, for example, or if we see new activity from a piece of malware or some specific kit that's being used by the attackers, right? I mentioned at the very beginning, you look at those companies that I listed on that first slide, and all of them were actually attacked in very similar ways. So how do you start to protect against those things that everybody around you is already being attacked with? We all know that the incident response cycle, or at least the traditional incident response cycle, is you go out, you detect things, you respond to things, you throw some preventative controls in place. The problem is that everybody's doing this independently. And that's a problem, because if you're doing it independently, and Tom, who's sitting here with me, he does it independently in his company, next thing you know, everybody's doing it independently and nobody's being able to benefit from the information as it's actually taking place. Now let me illustrate this just a little bit. In this traditional response type mechanism, First Street Credit Union, I hope there was no company called First Street Credit Union on the phone. This was intended not to be names of real companies. You know, First Street Credit Union gets attacked. Well, what happens when they attack is that they detect it in some form or another, and then of course they respond and they put in preventative controls and they put in other controls to be able to prevent that attack from happening again. The problem with this is that then when companies like Alpha Insurance Group and John Elway Nation get attacked by that same attacker using similar techniques, they have to go through that same detection and response process that First Street Credit Union went through. And of course, that takes a lot of time and energy to do because everybody's doing it independently. Now, we have something which we call Open Threat Exchange. Our Open Threat Exchange is a crowdsourced threat intelligence information gathering system where all of the organizations that participate in this network, and by the way, this is something that is free, it's available, and organizations can take advantage of, but we also then take the information that we learn through all the data that we collect, and we do that through honeypots. We actually threat share with about 25 different organizations, everything from malware vendors to other threat intelligence organizations and so forth. And we process somewhere in the order of about 500,000 malware samples every single day. And that allows us to get a really good picture of what are the different threats, how do they behave, which is the important part, right? I don't want to go grab antivirus data and say, hey, by the way, you have a threat, because you already know that, right? What I want to do is know, are your machines communicating in a way that's bad? And we can do that very effectively. So OTX allows us to provide this preventative response. Now let's illustrate this with OTX in place. In the same scenario, First Street Credit Union, they get attacked, they detect it, they respond, but at the same time, the information related to that attack, what was the communication, who did it talk to out on the internet, and that information gets shared up to the threat exchange. That then gets propagated down into all of the environments that are participating as part of the threat intelligence capability that we include, so that when this attacker then comes along and tries to attack these other guys, they're already aware of the threat, and you can put those preventative responses in place prior to being attacked. Now, if you're First Street Credit Union, of course, you don't want to be the first guy to get attacked, but you know, the odds are when you're looking at tens of thousands of people who are part of this network, it allows you to get a much better picture of what's happening, and you can be much more responsive because there's a lot of organizations similar to you that And it's very simple. This allows you to be able to shift the advantage from the attacker to the defender, right? As defenders, we're already dealing with time and challenges with budget and resources and all those things, right? Attackers have all the time in the world and the resources available to shift and change as needed. So this allows us to be that mitigating capability to get that information out into people's hands much more quickly, and that gives you an advantage over the defender. As I mentioned, this thing is open and free, not the product, but the open threat exchange. And of course, from that, every single member that participates as part of Open Threat Exchange gets to benefit from that. Now, as I mentioned, we take that information that we learn about these threats and all of the bad things that are happening, and we translate that to a specific set of threat intelligence. And by threat intelligence, what I mean is it's a coordinated set of signatures and other types of information that we provide into the product to tell our product, hey, here's all of the threats that are taking place out there. And then we update that frequently to make sure that you always have the latest and greatest information about the threats that are taking place, but done so in a way that's actionable and allows you to be able to respond to the threats very quickly. All right. Now, of course, if we do that, this pretty dramatically disrupts and changes the detection cycle. It becomes a much more automated process. It allows us to be able to respond more effectively. And if you think about the core premise behind what PCI is asking all of you to do, that's it, right, is to get better about not only putting the right preventative controls in place, but also the detective controls to find the bad things before a compromise happens and you have data stolen from your cardholder data environment. Okay. All right. Now, if we were to kind of take a look at all this and we read between the lines, right, everyone always talks about the fact that organizations that have been breached, they may have been compliant at one point, but they kind of go through this seesaw action, right, where you get compliant, but then you become non-compliant, and then you go compliant again because you put a lot of time and energy into it, and then you become non-compliant again, and so forth. Well, the reality is that the better that you can get about more of a continuous monitoring type perspective, right, it gives you a much better way to be able to respond to threats and also be compliant continuously through the life cycle of your environment. And of course, that's because when you look at this, right, we know that the threats change. Threats are changing every day. And so when you look at things like your correlation rules and your IP reputation data, all of that needs to change too. And that's what we do through that threat intelligence that we just talked about. But at the same time, we also know that it's impossible to predict all bad things. You're not going to be able to find a solution that necessarily, you want to find a solution that evolves with you, because you need the ability to evolve along with how your organization grows, and of course the use cases that you need to think about as you continue to evolve your PCI environment as well. So why ALIENVAULT for PCI DSS? As I mentioned, we have all of those core security capabilities built into our product, and it allows you, without having to jump back and forth between multiple consoles, we can automate what and where you can based off of the information that we're providing, so that automation becomes a really significant component to being able how to actually go understand that threat and, of course, respond to that threat as well. And that's all built into that threat intelligence. Through the flexible and reporting structure that we have within the product, you can go get pretty much as detailed as you want to be able to run the types of reports that you need to and see the information that your auditors are requesting from you. And, of course, the dynamic threat intelligence from our labs team is part of just your ongoing ability to be able to understand what's going on within the individual requirements. These are the areas that ALIENVAULT currently provides support for. So you think about, for example, what you need to do, even in sections 1. Firewalls, right? Being able to do net flow analysis, system availability monitoring, SIEM, which means really event correlation and analysis. And of course, being able to just discover the assets that you have on the network. ALIENVAULT provides that as a built-in component to what we do, and all those functionalities are all built into the product that allow you to do that. Looking at requirement 2, right? Not being able to, or no use of vendor-supplied parameters. We include network intrusion detection, vulnerability assessment, host-based intrusion detection, and these allow you to do that automated vulnerability assessment to identify some of the weak and default passwords that you might have in the system. It also allows you to deploy out that file integrity monitoring type capability to signal when bad things are happening with files that you're not expecting, especially within the critical system file area. When we look at requirement 3, of course, protect stored cardholder data, log management, host-based intrusion, file integrity monitoring, net flow analysis, SIEM, which is, again, correlation. All of these things are really important to be able to make sure that the cardholder data is protected, and also to be able to tell you when a particular threat has either found its way into your organization, which may be outside of the PCI environment, or, God forbid, inside of the PCI environment, right? And these are the ways that you can start to get better visibility into what's happening and to do so from one single place. Requirement 4, encrypt cardholder data transmissions. Again, when you're looking at your NetFlow data, it becomes really valuable to be able to see some of the traffic that's going by. Do you have cardholder data transmitting in the clear? Do you have passwords transmitting in the clear? Things like that. And we do that through NetFlow, behavioral monitoring, wireless IDS, and again, doing some of that SIEM correlation type capability. We look at requirement 5, use and update AV software. Well, we know that a lot of organizations, you should use antivirus software, but at the same time, we can collect that data from the antivirus software. We can use that to correlate information through the log management functions, but at the same time, we can also take a look at it from an IDS and a host IDS-based perspective. So those capabilities are built in there. Requirement 6 talks about developing and maintaining secure systems and application. Now, you look at the sub-requirements. I won't read them off for you. You can read them on the slide. Asset discovery, vulnerability assessment. Again, IDS, all of these capabilities have a direct impact on your ability to meet these PCI DSS requirements. Requirement 7, focused on event correlation, being able to restrict cardholder data access to only those who need to know. Right? So that gives you the ability really to be able to monitor for access and identify who's accessing systems that shouldn't be accessing systems. Requirement 8, assign unique IDs to everyone with computer access. Well, if you start to see a user ID, for example, logging in from multiple locations, well, that would be a good indicator of somebody doing something bad, right? But you can do all that just through some of the basic log management capabilities, which is start to run some of those basic reports so you can understand what's happening and you can start to respond to the activities that you see. And lastly, as we take a look at the last couple of requirements here, requirement 10 has always been one of the bigger ones, right? Especially as it relates to log management. But you needed, it's not just log management; it's also event correlation and some of these other capabilities that you can see here. And of course, the last section that we provide capability around is requirement 11, and that's just being able to regularly test security systems and processes. You have to be able to run that vulnerability scan. And certainly, for known vulnerabilities, right, when you look at things like Windows XP, you got to know where those vulnerabilities are. Host-based intrusion detection, file integrity monitoring, event correlation, these all become really critical to your success, being able to understand what's happening and to get the visibility that you need within the environment. All right, so now if you take a look at all of these capabilities and you compare all of the different types of solutions that you would need to go purchase in order to be able to meet these compliance requirements, wouldn't it make a lot of sense to simply get something where all of those capabilities are already built into the product? Real quick story, I had a customer of mine a couple years ago who, I had this exact conversation around with where, not while I was here at ALIENVAULT, but they thought they bought something that did, for example, IDS, and unfortunately they didn't. So as they look at the capabilities that they needed, they're like, wait a minute, but you have a PCI solution, and I worked for a log management company. And they basically came back to me and said, hey, I'm not understanding why the IDS isn't working. I said, hey, there's no IDS built in. And when I found ALIENVAULT and I decided to come over here, I thought this was one of the most interesting approaches to be able to solve this problem, because it is actually solving the problem of being able to get that comprehensive visibility across those functional areas without having to go invest in multiple technologies to do so. Now, with that said, how about if we give you a quick overview and demo of what this all means? I'm going to hand it over to Tom DeCino, and he's going to give you a quick overview.
Thank you, Jim. Fantastic presentation, by the way. I think I'm basically, you covered everything. I'm not sure I have much to talk to here, so I'll just show you guys the login screen. Looks great, right? No, I'm kidding. So let's go ahead and jump into the console, and we'll poke around here a little bit and illustrate some of those things that Jim's talking about. So a couple of capabilities that are built into the ALIENVAULT platform out of the box. One of those things is just the ability to collect information from around your network, right? So if you've got a firewall, a VPN concentrator, like any kind of device that's going to generate information, we're going to take that information and just move this data in order to help establish. So, hey, how much log data are we retaining for the required retention period? And then that log data that is being retained, we're actually doing signature validation. So with the blocks of data that we're writing to our log storage, we're actually signing it with cryptographic SHA-1 hash signatures that allow us to establish that that the data hasn't been manipulated since it was actually picked up and stored there. So you can come in and validate, and it'll say, okay, you know what? Yeah, we're verifying that this log data is consistent with how it was originally looked when it was stored. So basically, the ALIENVAULT platform has kind of three different levels of event information. So we've got these original raw logs that we retain that you can really drill down into and get lots of, this is the format of the original raw log that came in, and from here we can, just basically click on pretty much anything in here and build additional searches and whatnot. But then we've also got kind of the next level up of what we call security events. And those security events are essentially that capability of normalizing the raw log data so that we can do some interesting correlation around it and show you the problems that are actually existing in your environment. So we can do things like, show you operating system events or individual types of data that have been collected in a particular environment. And then we've got a third level, what we refer to as alarms. So the alarms are essentially those problems that we've identified as we're analyzing the security event data that we're bringing into the system. So, just to kind of recap that, raw logs for long-term retention, security events that we do normalization and correlation of, and then alarms that let you know where the problems are that have been detected. Now, how does this relate back to PCI? Well, from a log retention standpoint, you've got some requirement to retain the log data that's being generated in your environment for some period of time. It's typically a year for most compliance requirements. PCI may vary from that in some circumstances, but point is you've got to keep the data for a long time. You've also got to be able to differentiate between normal information and information that represents significant issues in your PCI network. And so the security events and the normalization and correlation is what allows you to achieve that. And then these alarms are essentially the representation of that. So that's kind of how we help you in a big picture address this security, visibility, and compliance need. Now, getting back to some of the capabilities that are built into the ALIENVAULT platform, Jim kind of walked us through this already, so I'll just kind of illustrate it for you here. We've got network intrusion detection built in, passive inventory monitoring, and net flow monitoring. Basically, these are three separate components within the same system that allow us to observe the network communications, identify threats, as well as learn about your environment and show you how the bandwidth is being consumed in your network, for example. Show you when new systems are coming online, when new services are coming online. That's what the passive inventory does for you. And so there's just lots of good information that you're going to be able to get from this. One of those PCI requirements is just understanding what exists inside of your PCI network. And if somebody comes and plugs a rogue system into your PCI and scope network, that's something you want to be able to identify, right? And so we're going to recognize that just as soon as that system starts communicating on the network, we're going to see it and identify it as a new asset. We'll generate an event which you can be alerted on. Same goes for new services that are popping up on existing assets. So this passive inventory is able to identify those things when they start communicating on the network in real time. And then the active inventory is basically a scan that you schedule. You can run it, multiple times throughout the period of a day, or you can run it, on a daily basis or weekly basis. So you've basically got flexibility on how you want this scan to be scheduled. And it's essentially an Nmap scan that goes out and finds every host that's alive on the network segment that you point it to. And from that, we can really get a lot of visibility around, that asset discovery piece that is kind of a PCI requirement. And then we kind of follow all of that up with vulnerability scanning. So again, really simple to set up. You just come in and define a scan schedule. You specify, daily, weekly, or monthly scans. You point it to the network segments you want that scan to run against. And it goes and finds all of those vulnerabilities in the environment for you that you need to have awareness of. So a couple of great things built in out of the box. Another piece is that host intrusion detection agent essentially covers some key PCI requirements for us there as well. Being able to recognize, for example, critical files within the file system that are being modified or manipulated. So it does file integrity monitoring. It also does registry integrity monitoring. So if the registry of a Windows host is being modified, we'll identify that. And then in addition to those integrity monitoring capabilities, it's also monitoring the audit logs of the system. So for example, the system event log or the security event log, the system is, or the agent is essentially pulling that log information and sending it back to the ALIENVAULT server so that we can correlate on, who's logging into the system. What are they making changes to the account profile? Are they making changes to the security policy? Anything like that's occurring on the system, we'll recognize that because the host intrusion detection agent is going to collect the logs associated with that activity. You can actually deploy these agents directly to the system, the Windows hosts where you want the monitoring to be performed. You can do that straight from our web interface here. So you just come in and specify the credentials needed to push the agents out, and it actually installs them remotely and gets the agent up and running automatically. Really simple deployment process to get the value out of these agents. So one of the things that's really great about the ALIENVAULT platform in providing you with all these capabilities is that we give you some simple snapshots that you can work with of the assets that are in question here. So a couple of nice things that you can do. This is the asset inventory where you can drill down into individual assets and find out what types of information are present there or what types of details you've been able to collect for that particular asset. And you can actually build all kinds of search criteria around this asset data to narrow it down to specific types of assets. And you can save that search criteria in the form of a group so that you can come in and look at, for example, asset groups. And maybe we've got a PCI and scope group that we've saved, and it's got some number of assets associated with it. When you're in this view, you've got the ability to see, basically all the assets that you have associated with that group. And from here, you can make kind of a quick high-level compliance assessment of these assets. So do we have visibility into what's running on these assets? Well, the asset discovery is going to tell us you know, what specific ports are open on these assets and what services they're listening on, and if they're vulnerable. So here we can see that, you know, we have done asset discovery on these systems where we've got visibility on all the services that they're running. We've done vulnerability scanning so that we've been able to confirm, you know, if there are vulnerabilities present, we have visibility on that. And then do we have data? Are we collecting events from these systems? So you're able to get a really quick at-a-glance kind of confirmation that, okay, we are collecting events associated with assets in this group. And then, you know, to the next level of, do we have the host intrusion detection agent deployed on the assets in this group? And again, that HIDS agent is a significant PCI requirement, right? Having the file integrity monitoring in place. And in this case, the little dot here is yellow, indicating that some assets in this group actually have the agent deployed, but not all of them. And so that's an indication that you need to continue to do some additional work in order to get all of these systems up to, you know, the appropriate compliance level. So lots of great stuff that you can do with the asset inventory in order to really help you move towards that compliance capability. Now, I'm going to take you to another system here really quickly, and we're going to look at some different types of data just to really illustrate the value of the Open Threat Exchange for you. This is, and again, just from an illustration standpoint, to show you how much data we've got in the Open Threat Exchange and the amount of information or the amount of value that it adds. I'll show you this dashboard here. So this is basically a representation of the ALIENVAULT Open Threat Exchange and the amount of systems that we're tracking out on the internet, the actual threats that we're tracking out there. So we kind of break it down per country or geographic area. We've got currently about 230,000 assets, or not assets, but actual threats that we're tracking in our IP reputation database. And we've broken all of those individual threats down into various categories of activity so that you can get some visibility around, you know, what types of malicious activity are they up to, where are they located in the world. And currently we've got somewhere in the neighborhood of just under 11,000 installations of the ALIENVAULT platform that are actually contributing to this repository of IP reputation data. So there's lots and lots of systems out there that are tracking these threats and then feeding information back to us for us to be able to, you know, provide this value back out to our entire community. So what can you do with this data? Well, you can do a lot of really interesting things. You know, it's a PCI requirement to collect firewall logs inside of the whatever log management or SIEM solution you have deployed. You've got to collect that firewall log data anyway. So what if we do something really interesting with it? They're not terribly useful, right? I mean, they really don't get much value from that unless you really drill down and do some extensive analysis. In the ALIENVAULT platform, you can get an immense amount of value out of this firewall data just by layering that IP reputation activity over the top of it. So basically, I just applied a filter and said, you know what, I want to see any activity where there's a firewall event that's involved with some known bad reputation host. And now all of a sudden, that firewall information that I'm seeing becomes really, really insightful. So we're seeing firewall permit events from a Cisco ASA. There's some source inside of our network that's communicating out on the internet with these known bad hosts. This is low-hanging fruit here, right? Obviously, there's something wrong with this system. It needs attention, and we could tell that purely just from these firewall logs. And in this case, we've actually got multiple systems, multiple known threats out on the internet that this host is interacting with. If you mouse over that little target, which is an indicator that this is a known bad host, it actually tells you why it's a bad host. So in this case, this IP is a known malware domain. The next one below it, that's a known command and control server as well as a known malware IP and malware domain. So we've got lots of good information here that we're able to show you about these particular threats. Now, if we kind of take that to the next level, and drill down into the actual threat, we can show you, the details about the IP. So we've got a bunch of analysis engines that run here at the ALIENVAULT headquarters that go out and essentially scrape the internet for as much information as they can find about this known bad IP. So we'll find all of the domains that link back to that IP address. We'll give you visibility on that. If the IP address is on any existing blacklists, we'll show you that as well. And then we also provide details around the information that we've collected associated with this host. So it's a known command and control server. If you drill down into that, we'll show you the individual different types of bot variants that this particular command and control server has been seen interacting with or controlling. It's also a known malware IP. We were able to confirm that this host is infected with malware, and we actually were able to download copies of the malware off of that system. So there was some, method that our research team was able to use in order to extract the malware off of that host and bring it down into our environment. And when we do that, we bring this malware into a sandbox, and we actually run it through our sandbox and figure out what types of communications does this malware engage in once it gets installed on a system. And as we're analyzing that, the system actually automatically creates signature sets for our intrusion detection system that allows us to become very effective at detecting this type of activity. So when we've done that, we package these signature sets up and we push them back down to the ALIENVAULT platform for you, so that you've got a bunch of visibility into what these individual systems are doing. And when you jump over to the alarms interface, we're going to show you here the view that allows us to illustrate, individual problems that are being detected. And you can see, very specific stuff like this. So Trojan infections, we've identified here that there's some kind of issue with the Zeus Trojan, and our intrusion detection system has identified specifically that traffic is occurring on the network, and we've generated an alarm as such. So basically, the IDS is able to perform that network level threat detection on your PCI in-scope environment and let you know, hey, we've got some communications that are occurring that are malicious in nature associated with your PCI in-scope group. You can build all kinds of custom correlations around that as well, and identify things like, hey, when we see authentication failures that are occurring in the environment, we can go ahead and recognize that this activity is occurring repeatedly, and then generate alarms as such and throw these things up so that you get visibility on these attacks that are coming in specifically to your PCI and scope environment. So I've kind of gone through a number of things here, but I think it'd be a great time to hand it over for a little bit of Q&A, and then we can jump further into the dashboard and go through some more detailed stuff based on the questions we get.
All right, thanks, Tom. One of the first questions we have here is about the Open Threat Exchange and the types of information that we gather. And what they're wondering is if Corporation A's information can possibly be shared with Corporation B.
That's a great question, and just to address that really quickly, and Jim is kind of the product manager here that's in place to make sure that things like that don't happen. So he's absolutely a good authority to speak on this. But just in general, the types of information are really focused on the attacker IP address, so the public IP address of the attacker, as well as maybe some information about the attack type, like the actual signature that was generated. Or the event type that was recognized from this attacker. But in terms of customer private information, that detail is completely anonymized as we receive this information.
Yeah, and just to provide a little bit more information on that front, Tom is 100% correct. We do not actually collect any identifiable customer information at all as part of that OTX exchange. It is 100% the external public IP address of where the attacker came from, and information about the threat itself, which is the signature that was used to determine that the threat was actually taking place. Nothing else beyond that actually gets shared. In fact, when you're in the interface and you have two options as part of that sharing. You can automatically share that information, or when an alarm gets generated, you can choose to send just the information related to that one threat. And it's an option that you can just click on, and it sends that data. It'll actually tell you exactly what it's going to send up. So there's no surprises there around the information. And of course, it's our intent to not collect customer information, because what we care about is not who you are and why you had a threat. What we care about is the fact that a threat took place, and we want to be able to make sure that others are aware of that fact, and that's it.
All right, thank you. The next question here is ALIENVAULT a SaaS solution?
So ALIENVAULT is not a SaaS solution. ALIENVAULT is both an appliance-based solution. Actually, not both, but we are an appliance-based solution. We have a hardware appliance, and we have a virtual appliance. So you've got a number of different flexible deployment type options with which to be able to deploy the product out internally. If you're interested in more of a SaaS type offering, we do have a rich set of relationships with a number of different managed service providers, and our go-to-market around providing SaaS capability is through those partners. And of course, we've got them both regionally in the U.S. and abroad throughout the world. So you have options there available. If you prefer a SaaS option, you have an option to do that, but you would be going through one of those managed service providers, and they would be providing that SaaS-based solution using ALIENVAULT as their core technology. Alternatively, again, you can just use our appliance-based solution and do it yourself.
And we do have actually an Amazon AMI, so if you wanted to deploy ALIENVAULT in the cloud and forward data up to or work with your Amazon infrastructure, you can do that. Or if you want to forward data up to an ALIENVAULT instance in the cloud, then you have that option as well. But you would basically own that installation.
All right, thank you. The next question I have here is, do we need to install clients on systems who we want to monitor or capture logs from?
So great question. There are a number of different mechanisms for collecting log data. Now, the network threat detection, that occurs through a span port that you plug into your network. Essentially, we typically span the internal interface of the firewall, and that allows us to see all of the traffic going from inside the network out to the internet, or vice versa, from the internet into the network. All of that is done without clients or agents. Now, if you want to do host intrusion detection monitoring at the system level, and getting that file integrity monitoring capability plus audit log collection and all of that, an agent is really a good way to go in order to get that capability. And then if you need to collect information without agents, we've got some mechanisms in place that allow us to accomplish that as well.
All right, thank you. So next question here is, sorry, it just scrolled away. How customizable is it to work with other third-party solutions and softwares?
That's a great question. So the ALIENVAULT platform is extremely extensible, a very flexible platform. We've got, I'll just show you a couple of examples here. We've got some things built into the interface that allow you to do some integration. So, for example, you can develop actions, and based on the actions, so you set up a policy, and a policy detects some type of activity in the environment, and then based on that policy, you can call one of the actions that you've developed. And we've got a number of different options. So you can, basically send an email message to a third-party ticketing system if you'd like, and open tickets that way. You can open a ticket in our internal ticketing system, and you can also execute programs or scripts that are running on the ALIENVAULT system to carry out various types of activities or commands, etc. So there's lots of integration that you can do, and this capability, this execute an external program, this is basically limited by your scripting abilities. So you can really kind of go nuts there if you want to.
All right. So the next question here is about vulnerability scanning. What options are available, and can PCI-required TCP and UDP ports be scanned?
Yeah, absolutely. So that the vulnerability assessment capabilities are quite in-depth, and we do a bunch of correlation on the data that we collect there as well. So, you know, we've got very detailed vulnerability scan reports that we can show you, you know, that illustrate the actual problem, the vulnerability that was detected. If there is some kind of fix or workaround available, we will provide that information. And just from a vulnerability scanning standpoint, we've got a very elaborate threat database that checks everything. I mean, we're running checks against individual operating systems as well as applications, network devices. All told, we have over 30,000 vulnerability checks in the system that allow us to assess your network very thoroughly. So we're looking at, you know, connecting to web services, for example, and FTP servers and database servers, and pretty much the whole gamut of anything that would be plugged into the network.
All right. So the next question here is, can you filter the Cisco ASA to show only permit logs?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a taxonomy built into the platform that makes it relatively straightforward to do that. If I were to, you know, use the product type taxonomy, for example, I could tell it to show me, you know, any firewall events that we've collected, and then from there, I can say, you know, I want to see specifically firewall access events, and that's going to show some restriction of activity. And then at this level, you can say, you know, I want to see firewall deny or firewall permit, ACL deny, ACL permit. You've got a couple of different options there. So these taxonomies are defined in order to allow you to get down into, you know, very detailed levels of events. And the other option is actually, if I were to just clear this out, you can do really simple filtering while you're looking at data. So if I were to go back and just say, you know what, I want to see all the Cisco ASA events, and then from here, I want to do a grouped view, I can see all of the different types of events that I've received from the Cisco ASA. And from here, it actually shows me how many unique indications of that particular event we've received, how many unique sources and destinations, so that you can do some very cool analysis on firewall data at this level. And this built inbound/outbound, this is an indication of a permit event. We can actually click on that, and it automatically adds it to our filtering criteria. So now you can see our search criteria basically has that signature in place. Now we're only looking at firewall permit events, right? And then we can do some really cool stuff from here, like say I want to group all these firewall permit events by IP address, and in particular source IP address. And so I'll go ahead and apply that grouping, and I can see, you know, who are the top talkers or who are the top IPs that are interacting with or going through the firewall and communicating out on the internet. So you can see some great statistics, like this IP address has generated 367 unique events. There is 16 different destinations that it's communicating with. I see some great stuff from doing a filter like this. A couple of hosts that are generating, you ask yourself, whoa, it take for a user, you know, that's probably machine-based activity or code-based activity as opposed to user activity. So it's really good insight that you can get by.
All right, thanks, Tom. And it looks like that is probably going to be our last question. I just want to thank everyone for joining us today. And just a quick reminder, we do have our weekly live product demo every Thursday at 8 a.m. So if you want to join us tomorrow, we'll be going through the product, and you can ask us some more questions then. And we'll try to have someone follow up with those questions that we weren't able to answer. And just want to thank you once again and hope you all have a great day.